Most baseball fans know Denny McLain as the last pitcher to win 30 games in a single season, doing so en route to winning back-to-back Cy Young Awards in the American League. But beyond this fact, most fans don't know much about the former superstar. And as it turns out, there's a reason for this. Because beyond his heroics on the field, Denny McLain led an insane and often hectic life off of it, one that included run-ins with the mob, gambling rings, a stint in prison, and a series of downright baffling decisions that destroyed one of baseball's most promising careers. This is the story of how Denny McLain went from zero to hero to back again. This is Sports Oddity.
Also on the president's schedule today is a meeting with the players in tonight's All-Star game in Washington. Mr. Nixon is to throw out the first ball. There may be rain, but a capacity crowd of 46,000 is expected anyhow. The starting pitcher for the National League will be Steve Carlton. For the American League, Denny McLain, who projects anything but the image of the All-American ball player. ABC's Dave Dials reports.
Denny McLain was born in 1944 in the middle of Illinois. And from a very young age, two things would define the young man's life: his skill at throwing a baseball and the wild and rebellious streak that followed him wherever he went. As the son of a father who wasn't able to pursue his own baseball dreams, McLain had the game pushed on him from a very young age, and he started playing on the field at just age 7. Even then though, he showed an uncanny ability to dominate the competition around him with his powerful fastball. And that dominance would continue all the way through the end of his high school career. But even though things were going very well for McLain on the field, things off the field were a completely different story. As the son of a drunk and abusive father and a cold and indifferent mother, McLain's home life was far from ideal. And as a way of coping with that, he began to rebel against his parents in any way he could. Usually by pulling off dangerous and reckless stunts, including one incident where he stole the family car for a joyride at age 12. And this behavior would only get worse once his father died of a heart attack while he was in high school. Between dealing with his awful home life, losing his father, and having a burgeoning reputation as a troublemaker, Denny McLain had a ton of things going on during his final years of high school. But even with all of that, he was still able to dominate on the mound, and many scouts around MLB took notice. As a result, he'd be signed in 1962 by the Chicago White Sox, where he'd start his career in their minor league system. While he was there, he proved he belonged right away, throwing a no-hitter in his first career professional start and striking out 16 in his second career start. And after getting promoted to the next level the very next week, he'd go on to post a respectable 3.56 ERA for the rest of the minor league season. But even with this early promising success, the White Sox opted to leave the 18-year-old's contract unprotected at the end of the season, and as a result, the Tigers would claim him later that winter. Fortunately for them, that would turn out to be a really good move for Detroit. At just 19 years old, he would fly through the Tigers minor league organization, and he'd make his major league debut later that year. And just like his professional debut a year earlier, his major league debut would also be a good first impression, not only throwing a complete game and getting the victory, but also helping out his own cause by hitting the only home run he would hit in his major league career. From there, he'd have some initial struggles as he adjusted to the major league level, but by the end of the 1964 season, 20-year-old Denny was a full-time part of the Tigers' rotation. That off-season, he spent some time in the Puerto Rican Winter League, where he adjusted his approach to hitters to be much more aggressive. And from that one adjustment alone, it seemed like the light bulb suddenly went off in Denny's head. In his first full season in the big leagues, Denny would post a 2.61 ERA and 3 times as many strikeouts as he did walks. And the next year, he would follow up that campaign by winning 20 games, throwing over 260 innings, earning his first All-Star Game appearance, and even getting MVP votes. By the end of the 1967 season, McLain had established himself as a mainstay in the Tigers' rotation and arguably one of the better pitchers in Major League Baseball. But almost nobody, probably not even himself, could have imagined what was to come over the next 2 seasons.
Outfield is shallow. The pitch. Fastball. Base hit. Tigers are going to win this one. Denny scores the winning run, and McLain wins his 30th ball game of the year as Willie Horton comes up.
The 1968 MLB season is widely known by baseball fans as the year of the pitcher, a year in which pitching was so dominant that MLB had to lower the mounds at the end of the season in order to compensate. And among all of the amazing pitching performances that were turned in that year, there were 2 that defined the season more than any other: Bob Gibson's and Denny McLain's. The former put together arguably the greatest pitching season of all time, posting a modern-era record 1.12 ERA and just over 300 innings, en route to winning the National League Cy Young and MVP awards. However, in a baseball world that was still obsessed with the concept of the pitching win, it was McLain's accomplishment that garnered much more fanfare. Before 1968, the last pitcher to ever win 30 games in a single season was Dizzy Dean, who accomplished it all the way back in 1934. As far as accomplishments go in MLB, this is about as rare as it gets. But with his pitching skill entering its peak, and one of the greatest Tigers teams of all time playing behind him, McLain was entering a perfect storm in order to make a run at the number. That season, he may not have put up as good a numbers as Gibson, but he was still dominant in his own right, posting a 1.96 ERA over 336 innings while posting 7.2 pitcher WAR and striking out 4.5 times more batters than he walked. With McLain leading the way on the mound, the Tigers would go on to win 103 games that season, setting a date with Gibson's Cardinals for the 1968 World Series. While he'd lose his 2 duels with Gibson in Games 1 and Game 4, McLain would earn the win in Game 6 that would force Game 7, which the Tigers would go on to win. Overall, 1968 was about as storybook of a season as you could get for Denny McLain. He not only accomplished something that hadn't been done in 34 years and likely never will again in Major League Baseball, he also did it en route to winning American League Cy Young, American League MVP, and of course, the World Series. So how does one follow up a practically perfect season? Well, by repeating as American League Cy Young, of course. Except this time, he only finished 6th in MVP voting. To go along with his success on the field, it also seemed as if he was extremely successful off of it as well. By the end of the 1969 season, in addition to the salary he was earning from the Tigers, he was also earning hundreds of thousands of dollars every year in endorsement deals. Not only that, but he was also moonlighting as a successful organist, playing on TV shows, releasing multiple albums, and regularly getting booked during the off-season for shows in Las Vegas. In many ways, Denny McLain was finally living the life of his dreams. But unfortunately for him, the other side of his personality would eventually start to catch up with him. And as a result, the dream he was living would quickly turn into a nightmare.
The magazine Sports Illustrated will report in this week's issue that Denny McLain, star pitcher of the Detroit Tigers, in 1967 was a partner in a sports bookmaking operation that had mafia connections. Sports Illustrated says McLain was put under pressure to help make good a $46,000 horse race bet the book lost late in the 1967 baseball season.
After having 2 straight years where everything seemed to go right for him, McLain's trajectory quickly took a downhill turn, with everything going wrong seemingly all at once. It all started in February of 1970, just a few months after McLain secured his second Cy Young Award, when Sports Illustrated published a bombshell story that implicated him with members of the Syrian mob. The story goes that in 1967, McLain invested $15,000 into a bookmaking business on the side, an operation that also happened to have multiple investments from members of the Syrian mob. This operation would come to light in part because of a bet on a horse race that left them unable to pay out the winnings to a disgruntled bettor. An incident that would result in that same bettor finding McLain and dislocating his toes as punishment for not paying out his winnings. In the ensuing investigation that came, McLain denied any criminal wrongdoing, but he did admit to investing the initial $15,000 and loaning an additional $10,000 in order to help with the operation's debts. As a result of his involvement, the commissioner's office decided to suspend McLain for the entire first half of the 1970 season, a punishment that many saw as being too light considering that this was involving a gambling ring, but the commissioner's investigation eventually concluded that there were no impact to the games, and such, McLain got off fairly easy. However, once he returned back to the playing field that July, things would become a lot more difficult for him. Not only would he receive additional suspensions that season for dumping ice water on reporters' heads and carrying a gun on the team plane, but he just wasn't the same pitcher that he was before his suspension. A lot of this had to do with his body, which, as a result of his carefree lifestyle, was not very well taken care of. In fact, at one point, McLain was drinking 24 bottles of Pepsi every single day. As a result, he experienced a large increase in his weight, along with a subsequent decrease in his pitching ability and fastball velocity. This, in addition to all of the scandals that were now attached to him, resulted in him losing all of his endorsement deals, and with it, a lot of his future income stream. And unfortunately for him, things would only get worse from there. That offseason, he was shipped off to Washington, where he'd struggle mightily for the entire year, putting up 22 losses, an ERA over 4.2, and spending most of the season fighting with his manager, Ted Williams. From there, he'd go on to pitch a few games for Oakland and Atlanta in the 1972 season, but after putting up a combined 6.37 ERA in his starts that year, it was safe to say that no MLB team was eager to sign him after that. Thus, at age 29, just 4 years removed from tossing one of the best pitching seasons of all time, and 3 years after winning a second straight Cy Young Award, Denny McLain's career in Major League Baseball was over. And frankly, he had no one to blame but himself. In the decades following his playing career, McLain would be arrested multiple times, with charges including racketeering, embezzlement, and drug trafficking. And more than anything, it's just sad to see. With the talent that he had, McLain could have easily put himself on track for a Hall of Fame career. But instead, he ended up behind bars. And in the process, he became one of the biggest what-ifs in baseball history. If there's one thing that we can take away from this story, is that we should never take for granted the gifts we are given. Because sometimes, you truly don't know what you have until it's too late.